The wind sliced through the canyon like a knife, carrying the faint smell of burnt sage and iron. Daniel Harlow's eyes snapped open at the faintest creak, an almost imperceptible shuffle near the edge of his corral. The moonlight pooled over the ground in silver puddles, illuminating the shadow of a woman slumped against the fence. She wasn't moving, not breathing, not anything except the soft whimper that finally pried itself into the cold night. "Please, help me now," she whispered. The words were fragile, trembling, barely more than a ghost of sound. Harlow froze. His hand hovered over the edge of his gun, though he didn't reach for it, not yet. Something in her tone, a desperate, unguarded fear, made him hesitate. The woman's fingers barely brushed his as he knelt beside her. They were ice cold. Her eyes, wide and glazed, met his for a fleeting heartbeat before darting to the dark hills beyond the ranch. They're coming," she managed, voice cracking like thin glass. Harlow scanned the horizon. Nothing stirred except the dry grass and the skeletal outline of the old barn. Yet every instinct he had screamed that danger wasn't coming from the open land. It was already inside the shadows, closing in. He dragged a chair from the porch and set it beside her, motioning for her to sit. Her body shook violently, and each breath she drew sounded like a small surrender to the night itself. Harlow's eyes roved over her, dust in her hair, bruises darkening her skin, a tear streak cutting through dirt on her cheek. Someone had chased her here, someone who didn't care if she lived or died. For a long minute, neither moved. The wind swirled between them, carrying a sense of something unresolved, something breaking the ordinary rhythm of the ranch. And then it came, a low, deliberate footstep from the edge of the corral. Harlow's gaze snapped toward the sound. His chest tightened. The whispering wind suddenly seemed louder, almost like it was holding its breath. She tried to rise, weakly, to step toward him. Harlow's hand caught hers, the sudden warmth shocking against his calloused fingers. "Don't move," he said softly, though inside, every muscle tensed. Another footstep, closer, not running, not panicked, slow, purposeful, watching. The woman's grip tightened around his hand. Her whisper, trembling now with raw terror, broke the silence. "They'll find me, unless you hide me." From the shadows, a shape detached itself. Daniel's stomach sank. The night was no longer empty, and whatever, or whoever, had been chasing her was only one step away. Daniel Harlow's mind raced. Every instinct urged him to shut the gate, grab his rifle, and send whoever it was back into the night. But the woman's hand still rested in his, weak but pleading, a lifeline tethered to someone in the dark. "They'll find me," she repeated, voice shaking, almost like the words themselves could summon the danger she feared. Her eyes, wide and pleading, held a question Daniel couldn't answer, without betraying something in himself he'd long tried to bury: empathy. He glanced toward the barn. It was half-collapsed, a skeleton of timber and shadow, but it offered cover. Not ideal, not safe, but better than standing in the open where the moon would make them targets. Daniel weighed the choice: hide her and risk his reputation, or leave her and guarantee she wouldn't survive the night. He spoke before he could second-guess himself. "Follow me." Slow, quiet. The woman nodded, leaning on him for support. She moved like a ghost across the frost-bitten ground, and Daniel noticed for the first time the sharp scent of fears clinging to her. Every muscle in her body screamed that she was carrying a story he didn't yet understand. Inside the barn, he eased her down behind a stack of old hay bales. The shadows swallowed them, but the smell of mold and dust did little to mask her presence. He crouched beside her, heart hammering. "Who's after you?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. I can't say." Her hands trembled, curling into fists against her knees. They'll kill anyone who helps me." The sound of horses in the distance cut through the still night, hooves muffled by distance, but too steady, too deliberate. Daniel's chest tightened. If the riders had come this far, hiding her wouldn't be enough, not if they scouted the ranch first. He debated shouting a warning, but her frightened glance silenced him. Every instinct screamed caution. Every fiber of his conscience screamed protection. The night seemed to press in, tight and suffocating. Dust motes floated in the thin beams of moonlight slicing through the barn's cracks. Silence stretched, fragile and trembling. Then came the whisper of leather boots on wood. Someone, or more than one, was searching. A knock? No. A deliberate scrape, a testing of the barn doors. Harlow's eyes met the woman's. Neither spoke, but the unspoken understanding passed between them. She couldn't face them alone, and he couldn't let her die, even if it meant his name would be dragged through the town like a carcass in the street. Outside, a voice called faintly, rough as gravel. "We know you're in there, Harlow, and she's with you." The woman's grip on his arm tightened, desperate. Daniel swallowed, feeling the weight of a decision that would mark the rest of his life, to act and risk everything, or stay silent and watch innocence be destroyed. A shadow moved across the barn's threshold. The barn doors groaned under the first shove, dust raining down like tiny gray meteors. Daniel Harlow pressed his back against the rough timber, heart hammering as the shadow of a man slipped through the gap. The scent of smoke and sweat hit him before he saw the face. A stranger, boots caked with mud, eyes scanning the dark with cold precision. "Don't move," Daniel whispered, tightening his grip on the woman's trembling hand. Her lips quivered, but she stayed low, just as he'd instructed. The stranger's eyes flicked toward the corner, sharp as a hawk. He didn't immediately see her, and Daniel prayed the shadows held. "I know she's here," the man hissed, voice low but cutting through the air like a whip. "And I know you're hiding her." Daniel's jaw tightened. The choice was clear: stand and fight, or surrender her to whatever hell had chased her to his doorstep. But the thought of her in those hands made his gut churn with disgust and fear. He couldn't do it. From outside, more hoofbeats thundered, the distant sound swelling into a crescendo of inevitability. Harlow's head snapped to the gaps in the barn walls. Shadows moved across the moonlight, horsemen circling, scanning, waiting. A second man entered the barn, lantern swaying. Its light flickered across her face. She flinched, muffling a gasp, but he didn't notice. Daniel felt his blood run cold as he realized how few seconds they had before she was discovered. He forced himself to breathe, to think. The barn offered cover but not escape. The hay bales blocked sight lines, but not smell, not sound. Every second that passed was another risk, another inch closer to disaster. Then came the first gunshot, not aimed at them, but into the roof. Wood splintered, dust exploded in the air. The stranger's head jerked up. The other men outside yelled orders, the tension thick enough to choke on. Daniel's mind raced. A stand in the barn meant almost certain death. Fleeing through the shadows offered a slim chance, but the woman's frail body couldn't keep pace. Every option was a gamble. Every choice carried consequence heavier than the moon overhead. A lantern light swung dangerously close, illuminating her pale face, and her eyes met his, wide with terror. Daniel had no more time to calculate. "Hold on to me," he said, voice low but firm. Before she could reply, he grabbed her, yanked her toward a hidden crawl space behind the hay. The shadowed man's footsteps echoed closer. Outside, a horse neighed, distant but urgent. Another shot cracked the night like a whip, and then the floorboard beneath them creaked sharply, too sharply. Daniel held his breath as the creaking floorboard groaned beneath their weight. The woman pressed herself against the rough timber wall of the hidden crawl space, her small frame trembling violently. For a moment, the world outside, the gunshots, the shouting, the pounding hooves, ceased to exist. Inside, there was only the sound of their ragged breathing. He offered her a flask of water, and she took it with shaking hands, drinking in tiny, desperate sips. The taste of cool, clean liquid seemed almost alien in contrast to the metallic tang of fear that clung to her skin. Daniel watched her closely, noting the tension in her shoulders, the subtle quiver in her lips, the way her gaze darted to every shadow. She was exhausted, but she was alive, and for now, that was enough. "Why are they after you?" he asked softly, careful not to demand too much. Her silence stretched, thick and tense, but finally she spoke in a voice so low he almost missed it. I know something. Something that could ruin men. Powerful men. They can't let me go." Daniel nodded, understanding the stakes in ways words could not fully capture. Outside, the pounding Vez had slowed slightly, replaced by the low murmur of searching voices. Time had shifted. Urgency still pulsed, but within this small hidden corner, a fragile trust was forming. He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn pocket knife, handing it to her. "If they get too close, this at least gives you a chance." Her eyes widened, a mixture of fear and appreciation. For the first time, she touched his hand voluntarily, gripping it for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Minutes passed. Silences stretched long and heavy, filled with the faint sounds of distant threats. Yet, within those silences, small acts of humanity emerged. Daniel tore a piece of bread from his pack and offered it. She accepted it, savoring each bite as though it were a lifeline. Their eyes met over the crust, and a fleeting understanding passed between them, two souls bound by circumstance, fear and the faint glimmer of hope. A sudden whisper cut through the dim light. He swore it came from the barn rafters. The woman flinched. Daniel's grip on her hand tightened instinctively. They weren't alone. A shadow fell across the crawlspace entrance. Not the men searching, they were farther off, but someone else. Someone smaller, moving with quiet deliberation. She turned to him, eyes wide, voice trembling. They found a way in. I think we're out of time. Daniel swallowed, feeling the weight of every choice, every risk. For the first time he realized that hope was fragile, and in the West, kindness was a gamble. But he wouldn't let go, not yet. The shadow loomed closer, and in the cold silence that followed, the night itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see who would act first. The shadow paused at the edge of the crawlspace, a figure barely visible in the slant of moonlight. Daniel shifted, pressing himself closer to the woman. His hand tightened around hers, as if the strength of his grip could somehow stave off the approaching danger. You two thought you could hide her? The voice was sharp, accusatory, and carried the weight of authority. Daniel recognized it instantly, the sheriff's voice, but rougher, colder than he remembered from the town. The woman's eyes widened. Even in the dim light, Daniel could see the raw fear that had not yet left her. He rose slowly, motioning for her to stay low. She's under my protection, he said, voice firm. You'll have to go through me first. Outside, the night seemed to hold a collective breath. The distant horse hooves had ceased, replaced by the faint murmur of a crowd gathering at the edge of the property. Rumors traveled fast in the West, and word of a woman in peril had already spread, carried on wind and whispers alike. The sheriff stepped fully into the moonlight, lantern swinging. His eyes softened, but suspicion lingered. Harlow, you're asking for trouble. I'm asking for justice, Daniel replied. And mercy. He nodded toward the woman. She's done nothing wrong. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then the sheriff's hand dropped from his holster. Another man, one of the riders who had chased her, stepped forward, face pale, recognizing the truth of the situation. One by one, the others followed, hesitation rooted in conscience and fear alike. The woman's body sagged with relief, but her hand remained clutched in Daniel's. I thought I'd die out there, she whispered, voice fragile. I don't even know your name. Daniel, he said simply, no titles, no claims, just Daniel. She nodded, a tear streaking through the grime on her cheek, and allowed herself to rest against the timber for a long, silent moment. The night did not fully relax. Danger had not vanished entirely. The men outside still murmured, the wind still carried threat. But for now, the immediate peril had passed. Daniel helped her to her feet, and they moved slowly toward the barn door. The first rays of dawn had begun to creep over the horizon, staining the sky with orange and pink, casting long shadows across the ranch. Years later, she would remember the small acts that saved her, the shared water, the silent understanding, the steady hand that refused to let go. And Daniel would remember the night he chose humanity over fear, risking everything for a stranger, and in doing so, reaffirming the fragile, stubborn morality that the West demanded of those who survived it. As the sun climbed, Daniel stood at the edge of the corral, watching the horizon. The wind shifted, carrying away the echoes of hoofbeats, whispers, and fear. All that remained was the golden light spilling across the land, and the faint imprint of a night that had changed them both forever. The camera would linger on the woman's hand still holding his, the dust settling at their boots, and then cut to black, leaving the West as silent, vast, and unforgiving as ever.